Nier Replicant, the slightly less popular entry in the Nier franchise by Square Enix, headed by the incredible Yoko Taro. He's quite an interesting guy. Most people don't even know what he actually looks like, because in practically all of his public appearances, he's wearing his Emil mask, known for its rough gray color and the ear-to-ear smile it dons on its skeletal face. Yoko Taro is widely known for making games that certainly tread that questionable line when it comes to subject matter. He's not one to dance around it. Though despite this, I still find that he's a genius when it comes to his approach to these topics and themes. They're executed in mature ways that don't disrespect the player or the subject matter itself. I do want to say though, I kind of find it a shame that some look down on the franchise simply because of some of the character designs. Yeah, there are some good looking women in these games, we're all thinking it, but it's mind-boggling that this is so prominent in people's heads when talking about these games that I personally know a lot of people that when it comes to Nier, all they think about is the girl with the big butt. And as someone who's actually played that game, it sucks, man. But hey, if that's enough to make them buy and support the game, who am I to say they're wrong? They may go in for the booty, but by the end they'll have found a real treasure. So yeah, subscribe to the channel. But getting back on topic for this game specifically, this one is a real tragedy. But even within those horrible situations, this game reminds us that beauty, love, and a reason to move forward can be found anywhere as long as you look up to see it. For this video, I'll be looking at the 2021 remake of the game since I find it to be the definitive version of it. The game was originally released as two separate versions, Replicant, which never released outside of Japan, and Gestalt, which was only released overseas to us, with it being localized as just Nier afterwards. I'll be referring to it as Gestalt going forward since it just makes things a bit easier. The main difference between Replicant and Gestalt are that the protagonists are widely different. Replicant stars a young boy doing his best to aid and find a cure for his sick little sister, while Gestalt stars a gruff middle-aged man doing the same but for his daughter. The reason for this strange decision was largely based on the idea that Japanese audiences would likely respond better to a teenage protagonist, and that Western audiences at the time would probably prefer an older protagonist, especially with games like God of War and other adult-oriented action games being popular overseas during this era. Now, it may seem like Square was coming out of nowhere with this gritty new IP, but Nier is actually a spin-off of an already established franchise, Drakengard. We'll get into the meat and potatoes of that another day, but like every game to follow it, Drakengard hosted numerous endings, most of which were very different from each other based on the actions the player made while playing. The world that we would come to know as Nier was created based on the actions that took place in the 5th ending of Drakengard 1, which is often considered the true ending. So with that said, let's take a small look into this world and how it came to be. Keep in mind, there's nothing really I can do about spoilers here. There will be spoilers for both the 5th ending of Drakengard 1 and the entirety of Nier Replicant going forward. It's necessary in order for me to properly convey what makes everything about this game so heavy hitting. So without further ado, this is Nier Replicant. Okay, so let's start from the top. In the 5th ending of Drakengard 1, the protagonists, Kaim and Angelus, traveled through a portal in order to fight a demonic queen. However, going through said portal took them away from the fantasy world they called home and brought them to a modern-day Tokyo, where they eventually killed the queen in the skies of the city, though just after this, they're immediately killed by a fighter jet, and while Kaim's body is never discovered, Angelus's dragon corpse was pierced by Tokyo Tower. This scenario caused quite a few things to happen to this world. 1. The body of the demonic queen began to break down after her death and become a substance known as maso, which looks a lot like salt, but in actuality it caused a new kind of disease that any human afflicted with it would be forced to enter a pact with the gods. Agreeing would have them turn into legion, red-eyed monsters. If they refused, they'd be transformed into pillars of salt. And 2. Angelus's body was retrieved from the tower and eventually used for scientific research by the Japanese military. This largely wraps up what happens in ending E of Drakengard 1, the ending that causes the world of Nier to come into being. However, the last bit is that within Nier, there's a type of red magic in this world. The source of this magic, which never existed back when the world was reminiscent of the real modern day, was the maso found within Angelus's body that the researchers began experimenting on, making it kind of obvious where the fruits of those experiments came into play. This is where Drakengard ends and Nier begins. Now, with that said, we cut to 2053. This is when we meet the protagonist, who I promise you is not called Nier. For some reason, everyone everyone calls him Nier, which to be honest makes sense. It's the name of the game, and even guidebooks and such refer to the character as Nier. But Yoko Taro, the mad lad behind these two franchises, has said time and time again his name is not meant to be Nier, and it's just meant for it to be anything you'd want. But of course, since that's the case, I personally call him brother more often than Nier, since I think that his design fits the name. And also I find a lot of the fan base tend to call him brother Nier and the adult Papa Nier, so I think it all rounds out nicely, but I do really like both. For this run of the game, I did decide to play my PC and PS4 versions of the game, so if during the video you see his name change between brother and Nier, that's why. But anyways, brother Nier is fending off monsters known as Shades in order to protect his sick sister Yona. Soon after, it cuts to 1412 years later, where the two are living their day-to-day trying to make ends meet. Yona is still sick and hasn't gotten much better, and our teenage protagonist heads out each day completing odd jobs from the villagers in their tiny town. Later on, after Yona ran out on her own to the lost shrine in an attempt to find a rare flower that can make them rich enough to afford top-of-the-line medicine to cure her illness, since she's tired of her brother being gone all day and putting himself in danger on her behalf. During this escapade, when brother is trying to save Yona from the Shades who have her held captive, he awakens and calls upon the strength of a legendary book known as Grimoire Vice, said to one day save the entire world. The two work together to defeat her captors and rescue her before the whole place comes down. Fast forwarding a bit further, the two realize that utilizing the power of Grimoire Vice's sealed verses, they could not only cure Yona's Black Scroll disease, but they could even cure the whole world of it. This, in essence, is the main objective of the game. As the plot develops, much more comes into play, like another book similar to Vice known as Grimoire Noir, who utilizes dark powers accompanied by the Master of Shades known as the Shadow Lord. There's a lot to this game's plot that exists outside of just our main hero, his book, and his sister. I think my favorite characters are arguably the friends he made along the way, those being Kaine, an extremely foul-mouthed swordswoman who doesn't take lip from anyone, and Emil, a boy in a blindfold because anyone he looks at will become petrified. I really like the dynamic these four have in this game. Kaine getting pissed off at anything Vice says, Vice being the only one who will dare trash talk her, even calling her hussy over her own name more often than not. Emil is really reserved, but he wears his heart on his sleeve, and he's just too adorably wholesome for this world, man. Someone get this man a hug. He desperately needs it after everything he's been through. Nier kind of just deals with a lot of their banter, but I think he fits in perfectly with them all because he's kind of the vessel in which everyone uses to progressively grow as people. Kaine accepting who she is, no longer hating herself for being different, and learning to love the people around her, and to even be able to finally express it by the end is simply incredible. She's been through so much that words can hardly describe the emotional damage that was obviously done to her. It deals with some pretty heavy subject matter too. Not all of it is shown, which I'll get into that in a bit, but a lot of it is implied. But everything surrounding her childhood to her late teenage years when her grandmother is killed by a giant shade is just traumatizing. In the end, it leaves her on the brink of death herself, but she's saved by a shade named Tyran, who fuses himself with her body, restoring the eye, leg, and arm she had just lost in battle. This kind of makes things worse for her despite all that, because now she's mentally tormented every day, constantly being egged on to give in to her anger and despair, begging her to use it to fuel her killings. Not to mention she's hated by the people in her village even more than they already did, just because she's different. She really can't catch a break. It's horrible. Moving on to Emil though, his is extremely gruesome, and especially since he's a kid, it kind of just makes so much of it feel worse. Again, a lot of it isn't shown, but it is described, often in vivid detail. At one point, Emil and his twin sister were normal kids. However, they ended up being taken in by scientists as experiments in an attempt to create human weapons strong enough to defeat the Legion I had mentioned before that began appearing thanks to Ending E of Drakengard 1, eventually leading to both being known as number 6 and 7 respectively. One the ultimate weapon, and the other her countermeasure. In the situation that Halua, Emil's sister, went out of control, Emil was designed to stop her, hence why he's got the petrification power. In the end, in an attempt to find ways to cure his curse and save their now petrified friend Kaine, Emil is forced to fuse with his sister's weapon form, transforming him into the skeletal form that most players would now recognize. At first, he hates what happened to him, how scary he looks, but reassured by his loved ones that it's fine and no matter what he looks like, he'll will always be Emil. He begins to accept it. Though at the time, we had no idea the severity of what that fusion would bring. In the end, he kind of became immortal, or more accurately, disease and old age could no longer affect him. And I guess as long as he isn't directly killed by something more powerful than him, he can kind of just go on forever. Yes, even if he loses his body. And yeah, that may sound nice, helpful even, but eventually, the weight of time will affect anyone. Keep this in mind for the future. Going back to Nier now, in a way you can kind of say he's the only one of the main cast that doesn't have an actual arc, though that's not the same thing as not growing or changing as a person. So Nier Replicant is split up within 2 acts, the pre and post time skip. While in both he's quite headstrong about doing what's necessary to save Yona, the approach to this is different in both. In the pre-time skip, it's kind of about just getting enough money to afford medicine that will help her disease, while in the post-time skip, Yona is kidnapped by the Shadow Lord, so the narrative switches to the quest being to get her back, despite her already being gone for 5 years. In Act 2 here, Nier is much colder when it comes to dealing with shades. Before the kidnapping, they were more akin to an obstacle in his path that he had to get past, while now it's like he has a personal vendetta against any and all shades. On numerous occasions, he says he doesn't care about the details or specifics as long as he just gets to kill them all, the tone of his voice being harsh and direct. Okay, sorry to kind of break the tension here, but the voice acting in this game is out of this world, man. Zack does a great job and fits perfectly as the younger protagonist, but man, I'll never ever get tired of hearing Ray Chase in his element, voicing the coolest and most well-designed characters. There's just something about his execution that just earns the whole thing my respect, especially as an inspiring voiceover artist myself. The way he can make a sad character sound broken, a happy character sound ecstatic, and an angry character sound furious. It's just incredible. His work truly adds so much to this game for me. But if we're moving on to the topic of the game itself, let's talk about how so many areas of this game look straight out of a painting. I think a lot of it is owed to the background work because the textures of the game aren't actually that mind-blowing or anything, but when they work together, it creates some breathtaking experiences while playing, especially with this absolutely intoxicating soundtrack. It's hard to describe what the music of Nier Replicant is trying to say, and as bad as that sounds, I promise I mean it in the best way possible. Nier Replicant has one of the few soundtracks I've experienced that actually warps itself depending on the narrative situation. It's composed in just the right way to where it always reinforces whatever is happening in the story. It's crazy because the songs aren't changing at all when you re-listen to them. It just has that kind of effect. Exploring the world of Nier Replicant leaves quite the lasting impression. More on that in a bit because now I gotta talk gameplay itself. So Nier Replicant is an action RPG if you couldn't tell that already. So throughout it, you'll be doing your best to weave between executing combos, timing your attacks, dodging, jumping, and dodging again. I think what really sells this battle system for me is the multiple weapon types. You'll have access to swords, spears, and great swords, all of them which really change up your approach to combat. Great swords are super heavy, so all of them change your attack speed to be a fraction of what the other classes offer. However, as enemies get more difficult to beat, a large part of that can be due to them gaining differing levels of armor. Great swords can tear through that armor a lot faster than the other weapon types can. However, if there's so many enemies around, it may be worth putting the great sword away for something that can keep you moving quicker. I found myself more often than not with a spear in hand. It has the speed you get from swords, yet they're much more powerful, kind of like the great swords, although not as powerful. They ended up being the best in between for me. I've always been the kind of person who prefers the well-rounded kind of playstyle than excelling in one and being terrible in another. In combat, if you hold the light attack button, you'll go into a short auto combo, which allows you to flow into a manual one, and I freaking love them. One, because it's unique and still powerful, and two, it lets you set up for a whole array of different possibilities, especially if you're someone who switches between weapon types often during combat. But when it comes to gameplay, there's two sides of this coin, the combat and the world exploration. And I'm not gonna lie, as much as I loved it at first, hours later I had no idea how miserable I'd be. But this next part is really hard to talk about without explaining a few things. Okay, like I said before, similar to Drakengard, Nier Replicant also holds a variety of endings. I have no problem with this. In fact, I love games that do it. However, the way Nier Replicant handles this makes me want to snap my controller in half sometimes. Now look, narratively honestly, I get why they had to structure it this way. It makes the most sense and it's the most rewarding. However, that does not stop it from a gameplay perspective from being dull and repetitive. So essentially, when you beat the game for the first time, you'll get ending A. There's no other way to get any other ending before that one first. After getting it, you'll load your save again and restart around the point in which we unpetrify Kaine. This is where ending B begins. In this route, however, it's 95% the exact same as Route A, so it's the same bosses, same cutscenes, same everything. However, this time there are a few new scenes sprinkled in, while some are original scenes but are slightly extended by 15 seconds or so. However, the highlight of Route B is that now there are subtitles for when the shades speak, so it completely changes the dynamic and perspective during most boss fights and encounters. They genuinely show that from a really understandable perspective, we're not exactly the good guys either. They do this well because they're able to pull off the player feeling sorry for the shades this time while also not justifying their actions. Like, yeah, I feel bad for Louise. She just wanted to be with the postman, like a family, you know? But that does not excuse her killing all those people just to do so, including our good friend Redbag Boat Guy. He really deserved better. Ending the game this time, we find out a lot more about the Shadow Lord, why he kidnapped Yona, and everyone's real identities for the most part. So essentially, back when the world was basically ending thanks to the event of Drakengard 1, they ended up hatching a plan to save humanity, Project Gestalt. I won't go over all the details because it gets pretty convoluted, but basically they had the idea that if they separated a person's body and soul, they can then reunite them after the white chlorination syndrome, the becoming salt phenomena, had been destroyed. They then engineered bodies based on each person's original and named them replicants. These are where the souls will be reunited within, while the soul itself will be known as gestalts, the first and original gestalt being Nier, who'd become what we later see as the Shadow Lord, confirming that the character we've played as the whole time wasn't even real. He's the Shadow Lord's, the original Nier's replicant body who gained sentience, which then happened to basically everyone. But because of a dumb move on the researchers' part, they didn't account for there being errors with the original gestalt, causing basically all of them going forward to also be corrupted. This would lead to what be known as a relapse, which is the true cause of the Black Scrawl, the disease Yona has. It's all because of a malfunction within replicants, because of said relapse or the death of their gestalts. The reason Yona always had it was because her gestalt was half relapsed when she was placed within stasis. Also, what I alluded to about Kaine and why she was bullied for being different was confirmed by Yoko Taro that she was born intersex as a result of an error in the replicant system. Her original gestalt was not intersex. This whole Project Gestalt may be why the world lasted this long, which is cool I guess, but it can't be denied that it also caused a lot of pain and trauma to people who would never even know the source of it all. Though I guess playing that version of the blame game, you can kind of just keep going with it. Like Project Gestalt was only made because of the WCS, which was a result of Kaim and Angelus not using Seer's power and taking on the Queen Beast themselves. With a tragedy of this degree, it just kind of becomes everyone's fault. Alright, I kind of went overboard explaining my original point for why replaying the game over and over is repetitive, but with all that known, you learn more and more of this as you replay the game, redoing the same boss fights, running through the same hub area with the game's extremely limited fast travel system. I think what would have made these 5 to 6 hour replays easier to get through would be a better fast travel system and a cutscene fast forward mechanic. With how bad the fast traveling is, you basically still have to run everywhere in the game. You do get a bored not too long into things that makes things faster, but it still doesn't help the dullness as much as I'd like. Actually, I think the biggest comparison I have when it comes to how the hub world design is laid out, I think it'd be Ocarina of Time's Hyrule Field. It looks charming, the music is whimsical, it washes you in the feeling of adventure, but in reality, when you look at them plainly, they're barren. Hub worlds to the most barren degree, and their sole purpose is to be an in-between for each of the respective main towns or areas the core story takes place in. Honestly, with that hidden Zelda reference in game that I'm definitely not going to show because you got to see it for yourself, may have extended to more than what we thought, thinking back on things now. But back to the cutscene side of things, I think sitting through these largely identical cutscenes over and over is boring too, purely because on a replay, I'm here for the new content, the inside looks I didn't get before, and because of how they're structured, you obviously don't want to skip the cutscenes or else you'll risk skipping the new stuff too. So if they allowed you to fast forward cutscenes and it would automatically stop when an unwatched scene begins, that'd be a game changer, man. I know this because I played games like that before. Zero Escape Virtue's Last Reward does this same crap with its multiple playthroughs, but that fast forwarding mechanic it has makes those replays worth the time it takes to do them. I know the situations aren't exactly the same for these games, but I'm not convinced that Square couldn't implement this if they wanted to. Without this, it makes you play the game once for ending A, then you do replays all the way till you get to ending E. Again, it's not all one-to-one, but it takes hours for you to truly shake that feeling of boredom as you redo stuff. And carrying over your levels and stuff is great, but the game only gets easier because it does not scale to your level. In a way, this is nice because at least I'm blazing through the fights this time, but this time at the cost of my attention span. I'm sorry, I know it sounds like I'm crapping on the game, when in reality this is a small blemish on an already incredible game. The characters, the story, the lore, the music, all of it is so captivating, especially thinking back on it all after finishing the game. I do think that if you go into this game with knowledge of Nier Automata already, I do think it sours a bit of the happy ending it was going for, but that's the fate of getting into a game series late when it's already got a sequel. But in a way, if you pay attention to the lore enough, that sour side of things was there long before Nier Automata came in the picture. But I guess that's where you gotta accept that sometimes there isn't a happy ending for everyone. Sometimes the actions we take have repercussions on people completely separate from us. Look at ending E in Replicant, for example. In the end, we still defeated the Shadow Lord, but he was what was keeping this world together. And because he was, you know, the main character's soul, he and everyone else are now doomed to eventual extinction. Even though on the surface it looks like everyone can be happy now that Brother Nier, Yona, Kaine, and Emil are all alive. That's why, and I'm jumping a bit ahead of things here, even 10,000 years later, he's referred to as the World Destroyer in Nier Automata. But again, we can't fully blame him. He doesn't understand what's going on for 99% of the game. When he's viciously killing these shades, he has no idea they're actually humans, nor does he know killing the Shadow Lord would doom humanity. The game's central theme is that there's two sides to every story, and that couldn't be more true. What a fantastic game. I know I say this a lot, and that's because I love talking about great games, but if you're a fan of JRPGs, you owe it to yourself to play this one. This is one of those games that stick with you long after the credits end. But as you may have expected, we're not done yet. The story of Nier continues on with Nier Automata. Yes, Nier Automata is finally the next KingdomAce episode. This one is gonna be a doozy, though I do think its structure won't be as difficult as Replicant's video was. Not too sure how the timing will end up, but there will likely be one more video before that one, making Nier Automata the final episode of KingdomAce Season 0, and the final video of 2022. Words can't express how hyped I am for the marathons planned for next year. Fire Emblem, Trails, Final Fantasy, so many epic adventures ahead, and I'm way past ready. So let's end things right. If you're hyped for the Nier Automata video and excited for everything to come, hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel would mean the world to me. Thank you all so much for watching. My name is Jordan, this was KingdomAce, and remember everyone to play some games, have some fun, and enjoy your day today.